What's up guys, this is Yasin, and today we're going to be going over all three of the newer decks from Justice Hunters, well I mean Yummy as well as K9, Vanquish Soul, and Dragontail, and kind of try to figure out which are the best cards against those decks, whether we're going first or second. Because there is going to be a lot of things to digest here, because obviously there's those new decks but also the older decks that we have to account for. So you can't really just play like infinite billion cards in your side deck and try to just like approach the new format with only those decks in mind. Like I said, if you don't respect Reizo Mitsurugi and Malice, is going to be really difficult for you. So some of these cards, even though they're really high impact against some of these decks, they're not necessarily going to be worth playing just because they don't really have any overlap against the existing strategies. But anyways, before we go any further, you already know the drill. Smash the like and subscribe button. It really motivates me a lot to keep making videos like these. And also a huge massive shout out to my Crystron spreadsheet. I'm saying this because I just added 47 combos to it, all the K9 Crystron combo lines, so I really recommend checking that out if you didn't have access to it already. Pretty much everything you need to know about K9 Crystron, which is a top tier strategy when we're going to be getting Justice Hunters. And also shout out to my sponsors, Supreme Pro at tsx1.com, and use the coupon code YACIN10 for 10% off. And with that being said, let's get right into it. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to be covering Yummy, and I'm going to be going over all these decks really quickly because for the most part, it's pretty much like the same thing. But Yummy is a deck that is very resilient through hand traps, but not too much through board breakers. Like, for example, with hand traps, sometimes you can vomit like 2 to 3 hand traps against them, and it really just does nothing at all. And if you don't have any more hand traps or board breakers, then it's over, because they're basically full comboing you through those cards, and you're hand looping yourself in the process. So in other words, the correct approach against Yummy typically is a board breaker approach, where you play cards like Pankratops with Dark Ruler and Metal Chonus in order to shut them off of all the quick effects they can do on your turn. Because Yummy, it's not the kind of deck where the end board itself is oppressive, it's everything they're trying to do on your own turn. So the Link one that is trying to quick sync, this card, you cannot let it resolve. You will definitely lose if they start getting their synchro monsters in rotation. With a card like Pankratops, you're going to be going really far because their monsters are ridiculously weak in terms of attack and defense. So you can special summon it and then run over something like, let's say, Herald of Arclight or one of their Yummy synchro monsters that actually has an effect and that is not negated. And then you can still use Pankratops in order to destroy another card on the field. So it treats very favorably in your favor. It treats very favorably, obviously, and it's also very good into Yummy Surprise, because Yummy Surprise doesn't bounce back up to 2 monsters or 2 cards on the field, but rather exactly 2 cards. So if you just go special summon Pankratops and do absolutely nothing else, you are in a pretty decent position. And if your opponent tries to like quick sync to like Book of Moon the Pankratops, it's not really the best for him, because he's wasting like a precious Book of Moon, and then you can just chain Pankratops and destroy something else. The only real issue is that you're kind of wasting your battle phase to do all of this. So it really is reminiscent to Evenly Matched. It's not like you can get like the best timing off of it, and your opponent can still quick sync during the battle phase. It's not just a main phase only action. So Pankratops is extremely good, and it's also very good into Solemn Judgment, because if you drop multiple copies and you get hit by Solemn Judgment, you can special summon it again, because your initial attempt was actually negated, so it doesn't count. Dark Ruler is a decent card, however it's not enough because they can recover from it with Yummy Surprise, so just keep that in mind. However, if you have Dark Ruler no more, and pretty much any other board breaker, like it can be Metal Chonus or Forbidden Droplet or whatever, you're completely fine. Like, you're going to win the game, because Dark Ruler is the card that does the most amount of, you know, like applies the most amount of pressure on your opponent. This is like one of the scariest cards for Yummy, and they really don't want to be on the receiving end of this. And it's actually better to, like, it's the better like board breaker to open with than Forbidden Droplet, just because with Droplet you have to use it like mid combo, like you're playing through a board and then you Droplet, and sometimes you even let your opponent interrupt you a little bit to get like max value. But with Dark Ruler, it's like you can have like an IQ of 5 and just like first action activate Dark Ruler, and then you start playing the game. And if your opponent doesn't have the Yummy Surprise, it's going to be really rough for him. So if you have Ash and Dark Ruler, what you do is that instead of trying to use your Ash on the synchro that searches to you, you hold your Ash very specifically on the Cupsy, and then your opponent will not be able to search Yummy Surprise. So now he's in a position where it's like physically hard draw the Yummy Surprise or bust, because without Yummy Surprise, Dark Ruler is 100% shutting down absolutely everything. So yeah, that's one thing to keep in mind with the Yummy deck. If you pair up hand traps with hand traps, it's usually going to be really weak. If you pair up board breakers with board breakers, they have to be 2 different board breakers that really work in tandem with each other. So like Dark Ruler and Super Poly, Dark Ruler and Forbidden Droplet, etc. Or even like Pankratops and Dark Ruler, that could work really, really well. But even like hand traps and board breakers can definitely make sense depending on how you are utilizing them. Now, obviously, Metal Chonus is an incredible card. This card's actually insane in the Yummy Mirror match, just because you are using your opponent's monsters to, well, not only break their board, but also you're getting your stuff going. So you can draw 0 Yummy starters, and just have like 6 non-engine cards, Metaltron as being one of them, and then you're negating the Link 1 on the draw phase or standby phase, and then you're summoning your own Cup C, and then you just get to play from there. It really is super scary just because it allows you to bump your like your side deck, like your deck count to like 25 non-engine or something like that, and you can get away with it because you're drawing a 6 card, you're drawing potentially with the Chummies, and then Metaltronus is a 1-card starter now. So going second in the mirror, Yummy Mirror, it's almost preferable to go second just because of the existence of cards like this. But if you're going first, then setting a card like this is like even better than a Solemn Judgment. Like your opponent, whether he makes the Link 1 or whatever, you just chain Metaltronus and then your opponent can't even respond to like Quick Sync. It honestly is absolutely terrifying. Like Metaltronus is a super crack card. It's very good against Yummy if you are playing Yummy. Otherwise, it's probably not worth it. But I guess if you can target a Herald of Arclight and then summon like a light monster with 600 attack, I can't really think of like too many. There has to be like something you can do. Maybe if you're playing like Mitsurugi, you can summon your own Herald of Arclight, and then you can summon like a Saji or whatever, like a Razor monster. And then like when you detach Herald of Arclight for like your Duo Drive or something, you can search for Habakiri. It's not too bad. It's not like insane, but it definitely is something you could consider. Now, the best card against Yummy by a significant margin, in the right context, is Contact C, because this is the only card in the entire game that by itself completely shuts down the deck, like regardless of the hand that they've got, because they've got no real out to Contact C. They can't even use Yummy Surprise to bounce it back because they have to bounce back opponent's cards, and Contact C, the last time I checked, was not an opponent's card. It's a card that you give to your opponent, which is really unfortunate, and it's also not a light beast, so you can't really bounce it back at any moment. So yeah, this card is a huge inconvenience. They can only really link it off for Cross Sheep if they're under Obedience Schooled. Otherwise, they can make an SP, but unless they play Asa, they won't be able to like vanish their own SP, meaning that they won't be able to point down, which means that they can't keep extending. And also like a Link 2, you know, it's not really turning into a Link 1 so that they can start special summoning their Yummy monsters. It hurts like there's no tomorrow. So unless they've got like Cup C and Cross Sheep, or like they gotta have like this exact situation, or like Obedience Schooled and then you hit them with Contact C and then they link off for Cross Sheep and then they start playing. This is the only way they can beat Contact C. Otherwise, it's just gonna be like an SP pass and then do absolutely nothing, which obviously plays really well in your favor. Contact C really hurts them like there's no tomorrow. Like I said, it's the only one card that just shuts them down completely, because any other hand trap in the game they can play through. Like even Shifter, even Retelling C, they can play through everything. Retelling C on the Obedience Schooled, it doesn't even hurt much, because even if you destroy Retelling C to search Contact C, by the time you hit them with the Contact C, they can quick sync with the Link 1 in order to make the double Book of Moon guy, and then they can Book of Moon their own Contact C that you gave them, so it's not going to be as good. Anyways, Clockwork Knight is extremely good against them because it turns everything into machine monsters, and obviously all their cards require like light beasts. So for example, Yummy Snatch, she won't be able to be summoned, and then Yummy Surprise can bounce back anything, because Yummy Surprise doesn't actually bounce back Yummy monsters. It bounces back light beast monsters. I think a lot of people don't actually know this. Oh my god, it has such a weird name, huh? It's not Yummy Surprise, it's Yummy Star Surprise. I keep forgetting this, but this card gets completely crippled by Clockwork Knight, meaning that this card is a board breaker and a Floodgate going first, and it's ultra easy to search in the Crystron deck. Super easy to search, because Clockwork Knight can send like your Case of K9 or your Crystron Inclusion, and then you search this, and then if you're playing Regulus, you can even destroy this, and then search Regulus that way, so you can make like gigantic boards with Clockwork Knight. So it's a card that you're playing anyways. In the OCG, everybody's citing this card in Crystron K9, and also it's collateral damage for Yummy, so might as well. I'm gonna take it any day of the week. And it's also a Floodgate that people are playing in the Morganite stun deck, because their monsters are always gonna be super strong, the opponent's monsters are always gonna be super weak, and then, you know, it's just it's also a Floodgate, like I said. Power Filter is the most like broken Floodgate against them. I don't know what's up with me. But yeah, this card, like their engine cannot deal with it. So if you activate this card against them, it's Duster or Lightning Storm or Bust. There's really just no other win cons. Soundproofed is also another interesting one. If like there's a lot of synchros running around, this is like a really interesting card. So you can use it at the very start of your main phase 1, only if you control no synchro monsters, and then neither player can special summon a synchro until your opponent's next end phase. So it's like a spell card, a Dimensional Bearer for synchros, that is kind of like a Mistaken Arrest, so it lingers for like your own turn and then your opponent's turn, which is really interesting. So like your opponent can also not synchro on your own turn, meaning that this card going first is basically D-Bearer, and then going second, it's also a D-Bearer for synchro, so Like I said, again, it's a Floodgate and a Board Breaker at the same time. Very similar to like Lockwood Knight. So it's a cool card, but it only covers Synchro Monsters, and that's the issue. Obviously, D-Bear is like more flexible. It's a thrust target. So I think this card is overall going to see more play than a card like Soundproofed. And then finally, Chain Disappearance is also Exodia against Yummy. But however, this card, there is like a drawback. If your opponent activates Obedience Code and then summons 3 Yummy monsters and you Chain Disappearance, the game ends on the spot. You simply win the game because your opponent has to banish every single Yummy monster on the field and in the deck, which is unfair when you think about it. The issue is that your opponent could also just Chain Yummy Surprise and then bounce back like 2 Yummies and then bounce back 2 of your cards. And then he only has to banish 3 cards in total instead of 9. And then also he has like 2 cards in hand, so it doesn't really do much of anything. So the best way to utilize Chain Disappearance is, if you get hand-trapped by Yummy, you thrust into Chain Disappearance, and then you do absolutely nothing else. You pass turn with no other card on the field so that Yummy Surprise cannot bounce back anything, because again, this card has to very specifically bounce back 2 cards the opponent controls, not up to 2 cards. So if you only have Chain Disappearance and nothing else, you're going to be completely fine. And then if your opponent activates Obedience School, the game is over. You're going to school his ass. So yeah, Chain Disappearance is pretty interesting, but it also does depend on how you are playing it out. Just make sure that you are aware of that. So yeah, a lot of really cool thrust targets this format. I mean, there's Dimensional Bearer, there's Chain Disappearance, and there's also some other interesting ones, especially against the Vanquish Soul deck. So we're going to be going over Vanquish Soul now. So this deck is the most like layered and annoying deck to deal with. It's just so overpowered, and honestly, hand traps feel like they do absolutely nothing. However, I will say that the Chummies are pretty decent. Purlia is extremely good against them for the most part. Sometimes it doesn't really do much of anything. Sometimes you even get 0 draws just because they don't have to care, you know? They go Stake Your Soul and then they summon from deck. But if you have like Purlia and Fua, this is where you're usually fine. However, if you have like Fua and they got like Joe Cool, they can Paralyze Smasher by giving you only 2 draws. And then if you Purlia them, then you're getting 3 draws. So if you're relying on a board breaker approach, then it's going to be good against their regular board, but it's going to lose out to Paradise Smasher in case you also hand-shove them. So if you're playing like Chummies and board breakers, it's like the absolute worst case scenario for you, unless you're playing Lunalite, and then you can just go, okay, activate Heavy Poly, summon Liger Dancer, pass turn. So you can't use any monster effects, you can't attack, but at the very least, you summon like one of the most oppressive monsters in the game. So it's not the end of the world. Yeah, Vanquish Soul is a deck that is very difficult to beat, but if you play like a full board breaker approach, it might just work. So Evenly Matched Dark Ruler and Book of Eclipse, I think, are extremely good. The Yummy deck can just play all these cards, so that works really well for you. And then Triple Tactic Thrust not only can grab, you know, the board breakers going second, so Dark Ruler and Evenly, depending on the context, but sometimes you Dark Ruler your opponent uses like Burger on Draw Phase or Standby, and then you thrust for a card like Dominus Impulse, so that you can negate the Vanquish Soul Trap, and then your opponent basically just runs out of interruptions completely. And for going first, there are also a lot of really cool thrust targets and just overall decent cards. So Mutually Assured Destruction, this card is like really gimmicky and it feels very fake, but it's low-key not too bad. You have to flip this card on your opponent's draw phase or standby. There's no other timing, otherwise it's just gonna lose out to a lot of quick effects that your opponents have. And obviously there are a lot of quick effects in the Vanquish Soul deck. There's Holy Sue, there's Burger, there's Caesar, there's even like Raisin on the field, there's like infinite. So yeah, you have to flip this as soon as possible. And it reads that both players must keep their hands revealed this turn. And then while their hands are revealed by this effect, if they both have a card with the same name in their hands, neither player can activate a card with that name or their effects. This is not really relevant unless you're playing a mirror match or unless like both players have like the same hand trap or something. But if you flip this card against your opponent is just not playing the game whatsoever, because no Vanquish Soul effects, pretty much. Like, only normal summon Raisin search, normal summon Mad Love search, and then field spell target search. That's basically it. And also Link 1, special from hand, or recycle back from grave to hand. There's really nothing else that can be achieved when you think about it. And also no Joe Cool, because Joe Cool is another card that has to reveal. And if your hand is already revealed, you can't reveal again. So that's the reason why this card has been seen play as a thrust target in the OCG. And it probably will see a little bit of play in the TCG as well. I don't think so too much though, but since Vanquish Soul just won the European WCQ, we never know. Maybe in Europe, it's going to be popular, in the TCG, maybe a little less. Now, if you want a permanent version of Mutually Assured Destruction, I will say the Eye of Truth is really interesting. This card is Ghost Ogreable because it has a mandatory, like, activated effect on your opponent's standby phase to give life points to your opponent, which is very stupid. So just watch out for that. But apart from that, I mean, it's the best, like, floodgate, I guess you can say, against Vanquish Soul. But it only works for Vanquish Soul. It doesn't work for anything else, so it's only good 33.76% of the time against like one specific deck, and it's just not worth it. Like, you have to draw the card And you have to like, it's only good 1 game out of 3 because you're never going first post game 1 more than once. So honestly, I think this card is a little cope just because of that. Whereas like Mutually Pure Destruction, it's just a 1 of that you gotta play. So, and you know, it's searchable by a 3 of. So I think it's like more logical because you can play 4 copies of this card, you know, over like only 3 copies of this. And this doesn't have to be hard drawn. And it doesn't take up as much space in your side deck. So I actually think that Mutually Pure Destruction is a more legitimate option than the Eye of Truth, even though this card is like significantly more powerful because it only affects the opponent and also it's permanent. So your opponent might never be able to out it. However, you can't say that this being a lingering floodgate works in your favor just in case your opponent had like Duster, Lightning Storm, etc. Now, if you don't want to play Mutually Pure Destruction, Thrust can also set Crush Card Virus. And this card is extremely good against Vanquish. So the only survivors are going to be Mad Love, Holy Sue, as well as Spell and Trap cards. That's pretty much it. So, and also I guess Ash, and I think that's it, right? I think every other card in the deck is dying completely. It's honestly devastating. And then it's also because, like, even if they have a starter at this point, if they don't have enough cards in hand, their deck actually just doesn't do anything anymore. So that's another thing to consider. Yeah, but the issue with this card is that it doesn't, like, linger on for, like, 3 turns because of the errata. The errata actually did hurt, but it's still a playable card. Also, by the way, finally, for more cards that like force players to have like their hands revealed, Ceremonial Bell, you just go like normal summon. It's kind of like normal summon Denko Sekka at home, I guess. And IP into SP really wipes the floor with this, unfortunately. And then finally, Mind on Air, which is like a Ceremonial Bell that only affects the opponent. And it is a Dark Spellcaster, so I guess there is like somewhat of a synergy with like the new Link 2 that's coming out in Doom of Dimensions. It's not too bad. Finally, Dragontail is a deck that I think is really weird because it plays as a mid-range deck if the hand is not good, and it plays as a hardcore combo deck that can make like a lot of disruptions when its hand is good. So it's really difficult to like really seize like its weaknesses. But I want to say cards like Dominus Purge and Ash are extremely good, and also Dominus Impulse. Ash and Impulse being the best because they can be used on Dragontail Rahu, which is the normal spell card that fuses 1 from the deck and then 1 from the hand. Ridiculous card, completely broken. However, Ash and Dominus Purge, they can be used as board breakers when they activate their trap cards. So, you know, negate a spell card or bounce back an attack position monster to the hand because they are also trying to draw a card. So the fact that you can deny those cards completely with a hand trap is actually quite impressive. And Yummy can play both of these cards. Now, Malice obviously can play both Ash and Dominus Impulse, naturally. And Dominus Impulse, I want to say, is probably even better because I'd rather prevent them from getting to that nasty end board than just try to like crack, you know, the board with like hand traps because sometimes they have other things at the same time, and I'd rather not have to deal with all those things personally, especially if they're playing the K9 build, which, by the way, I will be making a video on that deck very soon, and I'm actually going to be making a video on every single deck very, very soon, so stay tuned. Yeah, anyways, Retaliancy is Exodia against them, like, you actually just insta-win, like, it's not even close, you just insta-win on the spot, unless they have, the what's-his-face, the Joe Cool in hand. In this case, you're completely screwed, as well as Dimension Shifter just wipes the floor with them. Non-fusion area obviously is extremely good unless they have the K9 engine in rotation, and then Soul Drain, yeah, that hurts like crazy. No graveyard effects, they're never setting anything, they're never breaking your board, they're really just doing nothing. Soul Drain is like actually just game against it. Gravekeeper's Inscription to call like neither player can activate cards effects in the grave. That's also extremely good, and also may have some overlap against like Malice, for example. You just call the neither player can banish, and against Yummy, you can call neither player can special summon monsters in their graveyards, and it's also extremely good. So Gravekeeper's Inscription can be a fantastic card overall, and you can even cite it in Vanquish Soul, just because it covers so much ground. And finally, Grave of the Super Ancient Organism is not necessarily the best, but it's not necessarily the worst against Dragontail, but they absolutely can out it with the graveyard effect of Urgola, so I wouldn't rely on this too much, honestly. And finally, Super Poly is like playable against all these 3 decks, but I want to say it's probably better against the Yummy deck. Against like Vanquish Soul, it's a little awkward because sometimes like all their end boards are completely different. Like it depends really on like their hand, but sometimes they end like 3 different types and attributes, so it's like, what are you really super polying into? There's really nothing. Anyways, against Yummy, you can have Herald of Arclight and Yummy Snatchy turn into Mudragon of the Swamp, which is really good for you because these 2 cards are ultra annoying. So the fact that you can summon a Mudragon and then call like whatever attribute matches like the deck that you're playing, and then your opponent can also not utilize Yummy Surprise in order to bounce back anything because it targets. This allows you to break gigantic boards at the same time, and also you can call like you can also deny like the double Book of Moon guy. So Mudragon of the Swamp is a completely nasty card, And then we also have, Rock of the Vanquisher, as well as, Rock of the Vanquisher, as well as number C104 Umbral Horror Masquerade. So 2 dark monsters with different attributes also turn into Mud Dragon of the Swamp against the Vanquish Soul deck. Unfortunately for you this time, Vanquish Soul does not really target too much. So Raisin doesn't target, Holy Sue doesn't target Steel, Caesar doesn't target, the Snow Devil doesn't target. So literally everything that they got, they can out the Mud Dragon of the Swamp very, very easily. So yeah, this is maybe not like ideal for you, but it's not like the end of the world. At least like you get rid of 2 bodies, even though it's like not the best, but it's still like a really important target that you gotta have in your extra deck. Now I want to say like something very unique is against Dragontail, you can use Gremel and Heretic Seal of the Heavenly Spheres, which is extremely broken because you make them lose like 3 disruptions since like they don't have Gremel anymore, so you can just start cracking their board and they can't like pop your cards. And also you get rid of Heretic Seal, which is a bounce, but also it summons the Mululu. And Mululu is like absolutely disgusting because it can fuse for like Altherion or like Philia Regis, and then they can also just use Mululu's effect to like bounce back something. So it's like triple disruption off of Heretic Seal. It's like the worst case scenario. Technically, sometimes it can be like 4 or 5 disruptions because they can also use like Urgula and Pan in the hand, and then they can start destroying your spells and traps and monsters. You really don't want to get to like that point. So if you can fuse away the Heretic Seal and prevent them from also using like Femina, you're in a really good position. So yeah, obviously Super Poly using these 2 monsters is the best thing for you. If you use Altherion, honestly, it just doesn't do anything. And the best monster that you can summon would be Secretarion Dragon against them, which is really funny because this card is like unfair in the mirror match. And honestly, it's really cracked. It's absolutely disgusting, like, against them. They can't use any dragon or spellcaster, like, effects on the field. And the way do you know? Dragontail only really plays dragons and spellcasters. So if you summon this, it's kind of a wrap, I'm not gonna lie. Not to mention that if you're playing Dragontail yourself, this card is also extremely good to summon. I mean, it has, like, a really broken effect. Like, it can revive back any dragon or spellcaster monster in your grave, and then like put back another one on the bottom of your deck. So yeah, just overall a really interesting card. But like I said, it's only really good against like dragon and spellcaster decks. So if you're playing against Blue Eyes, it's also like a wrap. If you can use like Sage with Eyes of Blue and Blue Eyes White Dragon, you summon this, it's I think it's game over. You know what I'm saying? It's just it's completely checkmate. But yeah, the Super Poly I think is like one of the best board breakers by a long shot. It just doesn't do enough on its own. I will be making like a full in-depth video on like all the Super Poly targets and whether this card is like really worth playing, and also which decks should be playing this card, because obviously there's a lot of options. Yummy has been already considered as a board breaker deck for the most part, but you can really mess around, like play hand traps still, or only play hand traps, or play like hand traps and board breakers, or only play board breakers, but then you get FTK'd by Protoss calling light attributes, so it's a little whack. There's one final thing that I did wanted to say. So you can use Super Poly for the Axon Kicker Oracle once Doom of Dimensions will come out, and that will be as soon as, I mean, right after YCS Vancouver. I mean, not right after, but the next YCS starting after, so YCS Lille as well as YCS Lima will be Doom of Dimensions. So once we get that new set, Axon Kicker Oracle can start using a Psychic Monster and a Synchroic Caesar Link, which is extremely good against Vanquish Soul, because now you can actually start using Holy Sue and quite literally any of their Xyz. You can use Ripper, and then you can shut down like 5-6 disruptions off of that, because now there's no Ripper negate a monster effect on the Hunter Grave, there's no X-First Liberation that can pop and also summon a Werewolf that can look at your hand and then banish a card, and there's also no Holy Sue to either special summon a monster from deck or, you know, steal a monster you control. And obviously special summon a monster from deck is already 2 disruptions on its own, because it's raise in and then destroy a monster and then Caesar Value. So yeah, the fact that you can get rid of all of that off of Super Poly and then summon this card, which is also a good card by itself, is definitely something that I can appreciate. All I had to say for this video. I wanted to make it short and sweet, but I guess I had a lot of things to discuss. But thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know what are your favorite decks to play this format, or I guess this upcoming format, Post Justice Hunters, against the newer decks. And I'll see you guys very soon. Peace.